I call Jan Logie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it is with a degree of frustration and disappointment that I rise to take this call and inform this House that the Green Party can no longer support this bill as we did at first reading. Because like the Labour Party and the government, we agree there is a problem in this country in the exploitation of migrant workers. And in November 2013, when this bill was introduced to the House, we shared in this House quite a few stories of the exploitation of workers, and that we know that this is a very significant problem in this country, where workers are being told they'll be fired unless they work for nothing over the weekends. They're being almost kept slaves in some situations in slum accommodations, and outrageous rent being deducted for that rent from their wages, where people are being paid well below minimum wage and they're trapped in that situation. So there was a dire need for this legislation. There really was. And as been already mentioned for the National Party side, this legislation is important for the protection of those workers, and it is also important for the protection of our economy and the assurance that there can be a level playing field for businesses in New Zealand, because those businesses that are upholding the minimum standards, which aren't really that high in this country of protection of workers, shouldn't be competing with other businesses who are not keeping to those minimum standards. They are at a disadvantage in that scenario. So we need legislation to rectify that. So we were keen going into the Select Committee process to find out what we could do to make sure that this legislation addressed the need. And we spoke and worked very closely with the Union of Migrant Workers to check with them through the progress of this legislation whether we should be supporting it. And sadly, through all of that process, we find ourselves in a situation where we are unable to support this legislation. While it does penalise employers and put a cost on breaking the laws, which is very good and very important, it doesn't provide the protection for the workers to be able to come forward and report the exploitation. And if it was just the fact that it was putting penalties on and didn't have negative aspects to it, we'd probably support it. But also hidden in this bill are a lot of unrelated measures that are pernicious and actually breach what I consider basic standards of law and good legislation. And there were issues were raised by the legislative advisory committee advising against what this bill is doing. So I'd like to run through some of those things. But firstly, to talk that the basics, we had a message from from submitters that to enable people to come forward and report abuse is most people in this situation of being exploited are on temporary visas. So you need to guarantee them the protection of their visa if they lose that job for a period to enable them to look for another job, because otherwise reporting risks them being sent home because they'll lose that job, probably, because that employer, with these penalties will no longer be in a position to employ. So you have to assure that they have a job and protection to be able to stay here, to be able to come forward. The government adamantly refused to offer that. So there is no commitment to actually enable people to come forward. Secondly, what this does is enable the Immigration Department, not the Labour Department, powers of search into private residential properties without a search warrant. This is the country that has a very bleak history of dawn raids and a very real memory within vulnerable communities in this country of having been targeted by the Immigration Department. And this introduces extended powers of search into residential properties by the Immigration Department, not the Department of Labour, which surely, if your focus was on protecting employment rights, you would have given those powers or considered those powers for the Department of Labour, not immigration. And when we raised those questions through the select committee process, we were told, well, that was a policy decision. There was no answer for why it was being given to immigration, bar the fact that it was a policy decision. Basically, this government, that's their agenda. And who knows what's behind that? Honestly, if I was in that community, I would be worried. Because a lot of communities do feel vulnerable in relation to the immigration department. And if we care about the protection of vulnerable workers, we need to be enforcing and strengthening our labour systems. And then another aspect of this bill, which has not been talked about so much, and it isn't really related to the protection of vulnerable workers at all, is a very, very strange provision that will enable the immigration to deport people who have residency for if somebody's found something in their visa application that was incorrect. They don't even have to have known it was incorrect themselves. It doesn't have to have been a lie, but something. If somebody finds something in their original application that was incorrect, even if it doesn't relate to the reason they were granted their visa, this bill enables those people to be deported. That's extraordinary. We were strongly advised to remove that by the immigration practitioners, the Legal Advisory Committee and the New Zealand Law Society. Because basically it creates a strict liability provision and removes the causal link which enables deportation at the moment, where the false information related to the reason that their visa was given. Already we have a law that enables, if somebody lies or provides false information and that led to them being given a visa, they can be deported. What this says is that, well, anything in their entire application, if they got it wrong, even if they didn't know they had it wrong, and it has no relevance to the granting of their visa, and they've been here 9 years, the government can deport them. That's extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary. And when we asked the officials why is this provision? Why can we not change this? Because while there is the ability for somebody, if that decision's been made, to be able to appeal to the minister, to challenge that decision on all sorts of grounds. When we asked why this is in there, we were given no reason. There hasn't been an increase in false information in people's applications. The officials really struggled to give even one example of where this has happened. They did give one that didn't seem particularly worrying to anyone on the committee, and we were all just basically a bit bewildered about what on earth this was about. And with the suggestion of the chair, I wrote to the minister and the support of other committee members and asked that the minister might want to reconsider this, because it's, one, there doesn't seem to be any reason for it. Two, we've been given strong advice that it's not a good idea. And three, it's got the potential to increase bureaucracy and burdens on an already overwhelmed system, from if false information has been identified and then somebody appeals and it goes to the minister or it goes to the tribunal. Those systems are completely overwhelmed already. And now this is adding another level of burden onto those stretched systems for something that we haven't even been given a case for. It really, the minister's response was not, he wasn't interested. So it really is beyond me what on earth that is about in this bill. And there's also, we were advised against the fact that this creates a levy which the Legislative Advisory Committee suggested that we change, because it's basically kind of setting up a taxation. There's no direct identification around what that levy is going to be used for, which is typically good legislation. Is if you're going to levy something that's not just a general tax, then you identify very specifically what you're wanting to use it for. And it doesn't do that. So it's kind of setting up an alternative tax system within our immigration system to fund services that are overwhelmed, and this is going to overwhelm even more because the government hasn't funded them properly. So it's very little to do with the very urgent problem of protecting our migrant workers, and it is distressing not to be able to support it.
I call Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise on behalf